Aloha, everyone, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about facilitating long-term survival and recovery of Papahānaumokuākea's endangered finches through translocation. My co-PIs on this project are Rachel Rounds and Holly Freifeld. I think Holly's here, but I think Rachel isn't, so we'll use this time to tell as many Rachel jokes as we can. All right. As you can imagine, this project is complex in a lot of different ways, and so it requires a lot of different partners. And there's no way we could even come close to doing any of this work without all of our amazing partners, many of which are in this room, and one of which, Friends of Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge, is hosting this. So huge mahalo to all of our partners. So today I'm going to start with a little bit of background on these cool species and also conservation efforts that have gone into them. Talked a little bit about the decision-making activity we did to identify the islets where they will be translocated to, and then end with a little bit of information on our translocation planning, specifically this upcoming translocation from Monavai to Eastern Island at Midway. Okay, so let me make that go away. Okay, so 7 species of land birds are known from the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. 5 of them were on Laysan. So the Laysan finch or Ekupu'u, the Laysan apapane, the Laysan rail, the Kaloa pohaka or the Laysan duck, and the Laysan miller bird. And then 2 of the species are known from Nihoa. So the Nihoa finch and the Nihoa miller bird. Unfortunately, as many of us know, there was a history of resource exploitation on Laysan. It started in the 1800s and was primarily guano mining and egg and feather collection. And it culminated with this guy, Max Schlemmer, the self-proclaimed king of Laysan, introducing rabbits and other livestock to Laysan. He loved Laysan. He brought his family there. And unfortunately, the rabbits and the other livestock denuded the island so that by 1923, it looked like this. And eventually, the Schlemmer family had to get rescued. But unfortunately, a lot of species were lost during that time period. So we know that there were 3 bird species, the apapane, the rail, and the miller bird were lost, and some unknown number of plant and insect species. So of the 7 land birds known from the monument or from the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, we have 3 are extinct and we have 4 remaining. And so today, although the Laysan duck is super cool, today we're focusing on the passeroons. So the Laysan finch or the Ekupu'u, the Nihoa finch or Palihoa, and the Nihoa miller bird or ululu. So the ululu is a small insectivore. It's an old world reed warbler. It was successfully translocated to Laysan by our team in 2000 and 2012, where we moved a total of 50 birds to Laysan or Kamole. And the population has continued to increase. And as of 2024, we have approximately 600 birds there, and the range hasn't expanded to island-wide. And this has resulted in the birds being downlisted by IUCN from critically endangered to endangered. And so we're kind of using this as our model as we move forward to try and get some similar gains for our finches. The Palihoa or cliff wren is the Nihoa finch. It's an omnivore. We will often tell you that it eats dirt because that's what it looks like when we're on island. It's a Hawaiian honey creeper. It's present only on Nihoa, and it has an estimated population of about 6,500 birds. You can see there's color variation. You know, on the right, that's a bright yellow male. And then on the left, we think that's a female, but there's some overlap with what females look like and young birds look like. So we're not able to sex every bird we see. The Ekupu'u is the Laysan finch. It's very similar to the Nihoa finch. We argue about its differences all the time. It's an omnivore also, a Hawaiian honey creeper. Its home island is Kamole or Laysan, but it was translocated to Monavai in the 60s, and I'll talk more about that. The population estimate on Kamole is about 17,600 birds, and the population estimate on Monavai is between 200 and 400 birds. It has the similar color variation that I just explained as well. The threats to all of these small populations are there's highly variable numbers. There's limited habitat. Some of the populations face issues with sea level rise, especially the birds on Monavai. There's a risk of chance events like severe storms, overwash, fire, invasive species introductions. We say like some of the species are just one introduction away from extinction, like if little fire ant got to the islands, or rats or whatever. And then also non-native invasive species, or invasive species that are already present, such as the gray bird locust that's present and causing problems on Nihoa, and Synchus echinatus, which is also on Nihoa, Verbicina and Celluloides, which is causing problems on Monavai, and invasive ants, which are problematic for all the populations. So translocations have been used since the late 1800s in the Hawaiian Islands to decrease extinction risk by increasing population size and expanding range. Here's a history of land bird translocations in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which was harder to get than you would imagine. I was only able to get details because of Sheila Conant, who is hopefully on here today. So some people don't realize that the Laysan finch, or Ekapu'u, was present on Midway. It was translocated in 1981 to Eastern Island, and again in 1910. It was translocated in 1905 to Sand Island at Midway, and all those translocations were successful. And the birds did really well and would still be there today if rats hadn't been introduced during the war, and the birds were extirpated in 1944. The second translocation I'll talk about is from Laysan to Monavai. That was the Laysan finch was translocated in 1967. That population is still present on Monavai, but the numbers are decreasing, and the islet is less than 4 feet above sea level and is facing more and more imminent threats of overwash. The Polyhoa, or Nihoa finch, was translocated to Lalo in 1967, and they persisted, and there were like 6, I think, left in 1974, and then none after that. So it's unclear what happened, but it wasn't long-term, it wasn't a successful translocation. And then the Alulu, or the Nihoa miller bird, they tried to translocate it from Nihoa to Moku Mana Mana in 1968 and 69, but the birds weren't doing well in captivity, so they were released back on Nihoa, and they never left the island. And then, of course, our successful translocation in 2011 and 2012, which I've already mentioned. So a little more about the Ekapu'u on Monavai, so the Laysan finch on Monavai. There were 110 birds that were translocated to Southeast Island in 1967, and then they were removed to the remaining vegetated islands over a 6-year period. In 1986, they estimated that there were more than 800 birds on the atoll. But unfortunately, that number has been in decline since then, and our latest count was in 2024, so last year, and we estimated somewhere between 200 and 400 birds on Southeast Island only, although there was one very oddly colored bird on North that had patches of white on it. It's really weird, and anyway, we can talk more about that later, but this population at Monavai is at risk of extirpation due to overwash, storm events. The elevation is about 4 feet above sea level, so we're really concerned about it. Translocation is something that is written into the Papahānaumokuākea Monument Managers Plan. The strategy is to maintain stable or increasing populations of our passerines And to do that by regular monitoring of their numbers and food and habitat, and then also by implementing translocations of each species and site restoration as needed. It's also required by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the recovery criteria if we want to downlist the birds. So downlisting the birds will require, downlisting from endangered to threatened will require viable self-sustaining populations of each species on 2 islands that are resistant to ocean inundation. So that's going to require us moving the birds eventually to the main islands, which are high islands and resistant to ocean inundation. The recovery criteria also require stable or increasing populations for 15 years, that threats are addressed, and that genetic diversity is maintained. So luckily, we have information from the subfossil record that shows that the finches were present in the main Hawaiian Islands. Telespiza, that's the genus, Telespiza species were widespread in the lowlands, and 2 or more species of the 5 known likely coexisted in the past on each of the main Hawaiian Islands. So for example, Ekupu'u or Laysan finches were found at Barber's Point here on Oahu and Ilio Point on Molokai. The Palihoa or the Nihoa finch occurred at Ilio Point and at Mo'omomi on Molokai. So when it is time to move the birds back to the main Hawaiian Islands, we can use that information to help guide us. But that is a ways off, as you can imagine. Finches are especially susceptible to avian malaria. They were one of the flagship species, Laysan finches, showing how sensitive the birds were to avian malaria. And so any chance of moving the birds back to the main Hawaiian Islands, that's only going to be possible after we get malaria under control. So we're looking at probably more than a decade. I mean, I'm always accused of being excessively optimistic. And so I tried to rein this in right here and say, I wanted to say 10 years, but I said 15 years, but it's going to be a long time. And we're also going to need predator control, you know, so some sites that have been called out are Lehua or Kaho'olawe, and those islands could potentially receive the birds, but they would need threat control and habitat restoration. So in an effort to buy time for these species, translocations to predator-free low islands within the monument are a way that we can reduce extinction risk and also provide source populations for the future translocations to high islands that happen when the time is right. Okay, so now moving on to a more boring part, but I'll get through it fast. And this is how we went about selecting which sites and which species to move when. So we used a SWOT analysis, and SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is the moon goddess of Nihoa that I wanted to just throw in here if you were getting bored, because it's the coolest species in the world. But the objectives of the SWOT analysis are to compare and rank potential translocation sites for creating additional populations of Palihoa and Ekupu'u. And we wanted to prioritize which species to move first and where to move them. We had concerns and unknowns around hybridization. We know that the birds co-occurred at Ilio Point, at least based on the subfossil remains, but we weren't willing to chance it. So we didn't want to move birds to the same island. And then we had some concern with disease. So when we were talking about possibly moving the monovi birds back to Laysan, the team didn't think that that was a good idea because of unknowns around disease and other things. So this is sort of the core of the SWOT approach. The strength indicators refer to inherent aspects of habitat quality. So like size of the island, food availability, do they have nest sites? weakness indicators are intrinsic factors that reduce quality. So say there's native predators, or there's, it's in Hurricane Alley, or something like that. Threat indicators are extrinsic or anthropogenic factors that reduce quality. So that could be an invasive predator, an invasive competitor, or disease. Opportunity indicators are conservation strategies or management conditions that may increase the suitability of an area for translocation. So it'd be an opportunity if you're translocating an animal to a protected area, because you'll have more control over that. Or maybe the area you want to translocate it to has more support infrastructure, like say Midway versus Capo or Lysianski. So this is sort of the core of the things we were thinking about. And I won't go deep into the process, and we can talk about that later. Rachel Rounds is our SWAT expert. She facilitated the workshop, and she can answer any question you'd ever have. But we started by assembling our team. We selected potential release sites. We selected the criteria, the environmental indicators and criteria that we thought were important. We collected all the background information that's available. We weighed the relative importance of each indicator to the species translocation. And then we scored that indicator for each of the different sites. And then we reviewed the final scores. And if like the scores were, different people's scores were not very similar, we would have a discussion and see if we could get closer. So this shows the list of our team members. We had folks from Fish and Wildlife, American Bird Conservancy, DOFA, UH, the Monument Cultural Working Group. And these were the sites that were selected based on expert elicitation led by Morin and Conant in 2007. So the sites were Capo or Lysianski, Midway Atoll, and then Holaniku or Curie Atoll. And interestingly, the sites, the release islands were the same for each species. So that just means the islands were really good. And Capo or Lysianski came out as the best place to put both Papahānaumokuākea and Ekupu'u, or the lake sand finch. And then Holaniku was second, and Kalamanu or Eastern Island was third. And so to make the final decision, we had to decide which species was facing a more significant threat. And so we looked specifically at Papahānaumokuākea and Ekupu'u, and then we weighed each threat on a scale of 1 to 10. So we looked at population size, population variability, non-native species, food and water resources, risk of fire, island inundation. And here, a lower score represents a greater threat. So you can see the Papahānaumokuākea is more at risk, which, kind of makes sense. The Papahānaumokuākea has a smaller population and is on a smaller island. And so the Ekupu'u is the Ekupu'u on Manawai is a special case, right? It's the second population of lake sand finches, but it is facing some significant obstacles here in the near future. So we had kind of this special discussion about this population. The population has persisted for 60 years, but in recent years, there's been overwash of Southeast Island, which is where all of them are. And there has been an invasion of Verbicina and Celioides. And that plant has replaced the native coastal strand habitat there and is now almost predominantly Verbicina and Celioides. And it dies out for part of the year, which means doesn't really provide good food and cover for part of the year. So it's been especially problematic for the species. In the workshop, we discussed this a lot. We just talked about moving them back to Kamole or Laysan, but we had concerns about that. We talked about the genetic and behavioral differences, between the two populations, which I know some people on this call would say they are quite different, and maybe they can share later. there was talk about just leaving them on Monavai, but the outlook isn't good for continued persistence on Monavai according to the climate models. Like, it's not looking like they will live much further into the future. And then we also finally talked about moving them to a different island. So we ended up these are the outcomes. We moved the Ekupu'u and Monavai. We moved those to Kalamanu, or Eastern Island. Do that first because that population is going to blink out soonish. And then the second translocation is the Papaʻānaumokuākea, or the Nihoa finch, to Kapo or Lisianski. We hope that that happens in 2026. You know, obviously funding is an issue for these things, especially right now. And so that will affect, you know, the timing of these translocations. The third translocation will be Ekupu'u, or Laysan finch, on Kamole or Laysan, to Holani Ku, or Kiriatol. And that'll be the third translocation, and could happen as early as 2027. Okay, so just a quick recap. So as we're planning for the translocation, we talked about the where are we sending the bird? Where do we want to put the birds? We use the SWAT workshop to help answer that. And which people and organizations will help us. The SWAT workshop also helped with that. We have so many amazing partners, and along with a dedicated core team of experts from ES Refuges, monument staff, DLNR, and nonprofits. And then who, as in which birds and how many. And so, you know, we dug into the literature, done lit reviews for that, called upon our prior experience, and as well as the data from the population monitoring that's been going on since the 1960s. And then the last part is the how. How are we going to do it? So, you know, there's a lot of logistical issues, infrastructure, vessel charter issues that go into this, along with the capture, husbandry, transport, release, and monitoring protocols, and of course, fundraising. So this is kind of where we're at. As far as our compliance, our risk assessment, we're working on our ESA permit, our Endangered Species Section 10 permit, and our Section 7 consultations. Those are currently underway. Our National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 consultation for cultural resources is completed. Our NEPA review is complete, and our Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument permits are in place. So we think we'll have all the compliance done within the next probably 6 weeks. Our translocation plan, which has been guided by the IUCN protocols, is currently being peer reviewed. And so our next steps are to complete that peer review, complete the final steps in regulatory compliance. And then our date for the Monavai translocation right now is set at July 15th, is the day we get to Midway. And then we have some remaining funding that we have to secure. Here is a more detailed look at the Monavai specific plan. We're moving up to 100 birds, which is 50 more birds than we're moving for the other islands, because the idea is we just get as many as we can. NOAA is providing vessel time free of charge. This has made it possible for us to do that this year. And yeah, it's hard to verbalize how appreciative the team is, because this makes the difference for us. The team will arrive on Midway on the 15th and then depart on July 16th. It's an 8-hour transit to Monavai. We're planning for 2 to 4 days to capture 100 birds there. And then we'll have an overnight transfer back to Midway, and we'll release the birds the following day. 20 birds will receive transmitters, and all the birds will be color banded. We have a 3-person team that's going to remain on islands monitoring the birds every day for 2 weeks. Maybe not every day, but hopefully every day. And then our long-term plan is to have the birds monitored twice a week for the first year. And this is one of the little stinkers on Nihoa trying to untie my tents. Okay, and so this is a kind of a nightmarish slide, but anyone who knows anything about slides would never put up, but I was asked to put up some details on the funding. And so you can see across the top, we have like the cost, the funds that we've secured, and our funding deficit. And so our funding deficit is primarily around transportation on Midway. So the flights are really expensive. So we're going to need to raise some more money for that. And then we also might find ways to cost share and get that price down a little bit. Also, we're kind of deficient in terms of some of the food and lodging on Midway. But the things that are most pressing are these holding cages and release cages, and then a little bit of money for finch food. So I think there's ways to get the total cost down, but we are looking to shore up some of this last bit of funding. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nim's creation for this project, which I think is